Welcome back. Now, during this lecture series, so we are going to talk about control statements a little bit more in terms of repetition statements. So far we discussed selection statements. So what kind of selections we can have in a program, and what are the constructs that are available for us in C++, and also how to use them in certain scenarios. Now in here, so we are going to talk about repetition statements, where we need to repeat certain things over and over again, so given a certain condition, right? Now first of all, we'll try to understand what does it mean by repetition. So what are the main components that we need to have in order for us to repeat certain things over and over again, and then we'll look at a couple of repetition statements during this lecture. Okay, now first of all then, so why do we need to have repetition statements in a programming language, right? So as well as what is a repetition. Now, so let's take a very simple example. Suppose we have to write a program that reads 10 numbers from the keyboard and then add them together. Now if it is a case, then so our input can be something like this nature, where we have numbers like 3, 8, -6, 15, and so on and so forth, so 10 of them. So in order for us to add all of these things together, so what we had to do is, then we need to read these numbers from the keyboard, and then we need to add these numbers to a total summation one at a time until we are done reading all 10 numbers. So therefore, in order for us to write a program like this nature, so we can approach let's say something along this line, where we declare an integer variable to read from the keyboard, and then another integer variable to have the total summation stored, and then we can read the first number and then add it to the sum. Then we can go ahead and read the second number and then add it to the sum, and then we can read the third number and add it to the sum, and so on and so forth, right? Now in this approach, then, so we can write down these two statements 10 times to read a number from the keyboard and then add that number to the sum. Now obviously we know that this approach is not scalable, right? So say if we have 100 numbers that we want to read, so therefore this portion, so reading a number and then adding it to the sum, needs to be written 100 times. So that certainly duplicate code, and the code is become very kind of inefficient and not easily readable, right? So in order for us to do something like this, then, so if we can somehow wrap around this set of operations that we are repeating over and over again in some sort of repetition statements, and say go ahead and repeat this part many times, so that would be better. Okay, so therefore in order for us to repeat the same set of C++ statements several times, so in this case it happens to be 10 times, so we need to recognize several things. So first of all, so we need to recognize what are the set of operations that will be repeated over and over again, and then we need to recognize what is the starting point of that repetition, so that's called the initial state, and then we need to recognize the upper limit, that the stopping condition for the repetition. So when are we going to start, so when are we going to stop, and then what are we repeating? So those three things needs to be recognized in a repetition statements like this nature. Now in this particular case, so reading the first number is the initial state, right, and then reading the 10th number is the upper limit, that's the stopping condition, and then so repeating this set of operations is the one that will be repeated over and over again. So therefore if we can put this type of constructs in much more structured way, so we can write it down, so something along this line, so where we have a set of numbers, set of operations that will be repeated inside a box like this, okay? And then so we can have some sort of a counter to figure out whether we have reached the upper limit or not. So then initially, so we are going to keep this counter to 0. That means that we have not read the first number. Okay, so and then what you can do is we can have some sort of a gate in here, so that gate is going to figure out whether we have read 10 numbers or not. So then the condition here has to be if the count less than 10. So since we are starting from 0, it should be 0 through 9. if counter less than 10, so what we have to do is we need to read a number and then add that number to the sum, and then most importantly, so we need to increment the counter by 1 to indicate that we have done this operation one more time. So after doing that, so we go back to the repetition entrance point and then check whether the counter has reached the upper limit. So if it is not the case, we go ahead and repeat it again. So that's the kind of a loop that we can put together in order for us to accomplish this task. Now in here then, if we clearly notice it, so C in number and then sum equals sum plus number has been written only once, but the construct is put in such a way that that set of statements will be repeated many times. All right. So so this kind of a scenario where keeping a counter to keep track of how many times we have been repeating is called the counter control type loop. Okay. Now how do we put something like this thing in the actual C++ code? So that's where the C++ constructs related to repetition comes into picture. So there are three major ways of repeating certain things over and over again in C++. Okay? So we have something called a while loop and a for loop and a do while loop. So first, so we'll look at the while loop. Right? Now in the while loop, so main condition is something like this. So we have a condition check to determine whether we need to repeat certain things or not. If this condition check is true, that means that we need to repeat this set of statements. So then we have C++ statements that will be executed. So after doing that, so we come back and check if we have to repeat one more time. Now if you have to repeat one more time, so we go ahead and repeat it again and then come back to the condition check. Now if the condition check gives false, that means that we are done with the repetition. So then we exit from the loop. So then this part is pretty much a loop, right? In order for us to put together logic like this in C++, so this conditional check can be placed inside what is called while and then condition. Now set of statements that will be repeated can be placed within curly brackets for the while loop. In order for us to run this code then, so we can write down the condition here that represent the stopping condition. So if the stopping condition has not been reached, so then we can go ahead and repeat the statement over and over again and then come back to the condition check after executing the last statement inside the while loop. So as long as this condition is given true, so we are going to go ahead and repeat it. Now if this condition is going to give us false, so at that point then we will be get out from the loop and then exit from the loop condition. All right. So then the condition right here is like the door that allows us to enter inside the while loop as well as the exit from the while loop. Okay. So let's look at the while loop a little bit more detail and then see how we can put our example that we discussed so far into a while loop. Right. Now we know that then we need to keep a counter to keep track of how many times we have read a number from the keyboard. So then that counter is an integer variable, so its initial value is 0. So therefore in the memory, so when you declare it, so we have 0 in the counter memory location. And now in the while loop then, so we have while the condition happens to be counter less than 10. So as long as the counter less than 10, so we go inside it, read a number from the keyboard, add that number to the sum, increment the counter by 1 and then come back here, right? So suppose our inputs are like this, so then have 3, 8, 5, 9, -2, -1, something like this nature. So then for the very first time, so counter equals to 0, and then since counter less than 10 is true, so we go inside the loop. So then we are reading the first number, so then number will be 3 and then sum is going to be sum plus number. So initial value of sum is 0, then 0 plus 3 is going to be 0, 3. So and then we increment the counter by 1, so then counter will be 1. And after that we go back and 1 less than 10, so that is true. So then we read the second number, so that happens to be 8, and then we add that one to the current sum. So then sum is going to be 11, and then increment the counter by 1. So then counter will be 2 and go back here. So 2 less than 10, so that is true. So then we go inside and read the third number. So then third number is 5, and then we are going to add that number to the sum. That's going to be 16. Okay. And then increment the counter by 1, then counter will be 3, and then go back here. 3 less than 10, that is true. So likewise then we continue reading rest of the numbers, right? So then ultimately counter will be 9. So when you are done reading the 10th number, and after the reading the 10th number, so then we add that number to the sum and then increment counter by 1. So then counter becomes 10. Now 10 less than 10 is false, so therefore we get out from the loop, right? So when you get out from the loop, so then value of the counter is essentially 10, right? Now if we try to recognize different parts of this particular code, so the first one is called the loop control variable. So that controls the operation of the loop. Now the condition that we put it inside the while loop is called the loop condition check, right? And then we have the last statement right here is counter plus plus. So that's called the increment of the loop control variable. So always loop control variable has to be updated so that ultimately we will reach the stopping condition. If you don't do counter plus plus, always counter will be 0. So then we are going to read numbers infinitely. So that kind of a loop is called an infinite loop, right? Always we need to have a loop control variable update. So update happens to be increment by 1 this time. So it is not going to be the case all the time. It depends on the problem that we are solving. So this one is going to nicely handle the situation here. Okay. All right. So let's get a few more examples related to while loops now, and then see how we can write while loops in certain situations. Okay. So suppose we need to write a while loop that prints first 100 positive numbers. Okay. So suppose we are going to start with 1, and then we are going to display 1, 2, 3 up to 100, right? Now if our output is going to be something like this, then so how we are going to construct a loop for it? Okay. So suppose we have an integer variable called num, and then we are going to initialize num to 1 because that's the first number to be displayed, right? So in order for us to display the number, then so we need to write down cout num. Now after displaying this number, we know that we need to display the next number. So that's, if we display 1, so next number is going to be 2. So therefore number needs to be incremented by 1. So then after displaying, so we need to increment the number by 1. Now we know that, so these are the two statements that needs to be repeated over and over again, right? So therefore we can put this thing inside a while loop. So then you can say while under certain condition is true, so go ahead and do these two operations, right? Now what is the stopping condition? So we are going to stop when number is greater than 100, right? Because you are going to display the number until it is 100. So therefore the while condition we can put something like num less than or equals to 100, right? So when the situation where number equals to 100, so then we come inside the loop, display 100 and then increment number by 1. So at that point number becomes 101. So then this condition fails and then get out from it, right? So therefore this while loop right here is going to display first 100 positive numbers. Okay. So then here this is a loop condition check, and then this is a loop control variable, and then this is the initial statement for the loop control variable. So therefore this is the initial condition, and then this is the update statement, and then this one is the loop condition check. All right. So let's work on one more example. So now let's suppose we need to display first 100 even numbers, right? So when you display even numbers, then we need to start with 2 and then need to go for the next even number, that's 4, 6, and so on and so forth. Then the last number to be displayed will be 200, right? Now if I want to write a logic like this, then so we know that then this has to be the initial value, and then this has to be the last value. So again we can declare an integer variable called num, and then we can initialize num to be the first number to be displayed, so that's 2. Okay. And then inside the loop, so we need to basically display the number, so cout num, and this time we are not going to increment number by 1, but we need to increment number by 2. So after 2 we need to get into 4. That means we have to say number equals number plus 2. So that's going to increment it by 2, right? So then these are the two statements that needs to be repeated. So therefore we need to put this thing inside a while loop, right? So then while certain condition is true, so we are going to perform this operation. Now we know that 200 is giving us the stopping condition. That means that the number has to be less than or equals to 200 for us to perform this particular operation, right? Now in here then, so this is again the initial statement, okay, and then this is the update statement for the loop control variable, right, and then this is the loop condition check. Right, pretty good. So now let's take a look at a couple of more examples and then see how we can determine what happens when we have a while loop execution, right? Now in this case, so we have a situation where the two numbers are given for us, so count and num, and then we write down the operation of a while loop based on the count. And then as we go through the count, num will be deducted by 1 and count will be incremented by 1. So then after this operation we are going to display the count and the num values in the end, right? So in order for us to trace this example, so what you can do is then we can have a memory assigned for num. So initially its value is 25, and then we have the count. So that value is going to be 1, right? And now we are going to check whether the count less than 25. So then count is 1, so that is less than 25. So then we go inside the loop and deduct 1 from the num. So then num is going to be 24, right? And then increment count by 1. So then count will be 2, right? So after that, so we come back here. So when you come back here, so we check whether the count less than 25. So then certainly count is less than 25, that's 2. So therefore we go inside and then decrement num by 1. So then num is going to be 23, and then increment count by 1. So then count is going to be count is going to be 3, right? So then after doing that operation, we go back here and then check whether the count less than 25. So then 3 less than 25 is true, so then go inside it. So this becomes in 22, and then count becomes 4, right? So then we continue this operation in this way until the count is 24. So when count is 24, so then we come to this condition. So then 24 is less than 25, that's true. So then we deduct 1 from the number. So when you go through 24 times, so then a number will already be 2. So then 25 through 24, so that's going to be 2, and then so we deduct 1 from num. So then num is going to be 1, and then increment count by 1. So then count will be 25. So then once you are done with it, so we go back here, and 25 less than 25, so that's false. So therefore we get out from it. and then display the message. So at that point then, so count is going to be 25, num is going to be 1. So therefore the output of this one is going to be 25 and 1, right? So that's how we can trace a loop like this and then see what is happening as we execute the loop. Especially, so it's pretty important that we figure out what are the final values of the variables involved in the repetition. So after repeating a set of statements over and over again. So because those numbers will be used in rest of the program. Okay. All right. So let's look at one more example. So in here then we have a simple while loop based on the loop control variable num. Now in here we initialize num for 100, so therefore we have num equals to 100, and then the loop condition check is going to be num less than or equals to 150. So therefore the last value for the num is going to be 150 to get in here, right? Now let's run through this code a couple of times and then see how the whole thing works. So first of all, then the value of num is 100, so then 100 less than 150, so that's true. So then we go inside it. Inside the loop we are going to increment number by 5, so then num is going to be 105, right? So nothing else we do in here, and then we come back. When you come back, we are going to check whether num less than 150. So 105 is less than 150, so therefore that's true. We'll go inside it and then increment num by 5, so then num becomes 110, right? So after doing that operation again, so we come back and check 110 less than 150, so that's true. So then go inside it, increment it by 1, so then num becomes 115. So likewise we continue this operation, right? Now when number equals to 150, so 150 less than or equals to 150, so that's also true. So we go inside it and then increment number by 5, so then number becomes 155, right? Now 155 is less than or equals to 150, so at that point the loop condition fails, so then we get out from the loop. So at that time value of num is 155, okay? So then output for this one is going to be 155, right? So then determining what is the final value of the loop control variable after exiting from the loop is extremely important in a repetition like this nature. All right, now it is time for us to look at a couple of checkpointing questions and then see if we understood the basic constructs related to the while loop. Okay.